But it's not gonna cost the entire, okay. Cause it's, okay.
Get my guys go against me. Somebody, man.
What do you do now?
He just tried to fight me in front of everybody, threaten me. Let me get that for you. You good?
I'm good.
All those mics are live on the broadcast.
I think it's got you missed.
The mics are gonna be live on the broadcast,
Oh, okay.
just so you know.
They're live now.
Please send it.
Let the record say we're just joking. We're only joking. We like joking.
How are you? How you been? For High Street? I'll figure out with Sarah. Okay.
How are you doing?
Do we have all night?
Second time or third time they're sending
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So the pointers, so when we're up there, we have to point towards,
Kathy, did you get my message?
so
No.
that advances.
Oh, I sent you a message that for holding it down because I wasn't gonna do it.
Oh, okay, I didn't get, because I was just kind of tearing down and go there. All right,
Well, I
Yeah.
wasn't there
So this
clearly.
flag.
yeah, well, and we are establishing a calendar for next year. And if, you know, this is
So
a time to
monthly.
change times if we need if you need a better time, if, you know, whatever, because it's gonna be, we're gonna be going every month now.
Did you get a pickle?
I got a pickle. You want a die?
I got a pickle. I'm on a diet, man. You're right. On a diet,
I
man.
haven't done added sugar.
sandwiches
This is
back
my
there.
first
I
piece
know,
of
but I
bread
wait for
for 3 weeks. So
dinner.
I'm
with
like
my
doing
husband.
no. It's been great.
It's very civilized, yeah.
Feeling good.
My mood is like, it's
Feeling
really
better.
different. Yeah, it's
You
awesome.
guys can eat late. Yeah, we eat like 5:30.
Well, you've got young kids.
When the mic's on.
He said they were.
I know, but we're not even.
Are y'all ready?
Yeah.
Y'all are funny. It's been a
It's so
good day.
funny.
Wes's shirt.
All right, good
I thought it was
evening.
very Christmassy.
I call this meeting to order.
I got something for y'all. Sorry, Mayor Walker.
Did you all want to come out of your closed session first, Madam Mayor?
We did that already.
And you made an announcement out there?
Yeah, with the door open.
Oh, okay, great. All right, well.
No, we didn't announce who. We
Wow,
didn't
that was
announce-
great.
We didn't announce who we selected.
Ooh, this is the first chance we would get to do that. Should we do that up front?
Yeah.
We can
We do it now.
publicize the results of that closed session.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. Yes, ma'am.
I said reading out, I'm sorry.
So you got to amend the agenda
So we're amending the agenda?
to add the announcement.
Do I have to amend the agenda, John, in this case?
Yes.
Make a motion to amend the agenda. Make a motion to amend the agenda to announce who we have appointed to the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail Authority. Anyone want a second?
Second.
All in
All in favor?
Aye. All right, I make a motion that we appoint Kristen Clarence to the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail Authority.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And just for information, the next Albemarle County, the ACRJ Jail Board meeting will be Thursday, November 8th at 12:30 at the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Complex.
Okay. So, thanks for being here tonight to discuss the Neighborhood Development Services efficiency study findings. I'm going to do a few introductory comments, and then I'm going to ask Michelle Ferguson from Novak to come and talk with you all about some process. Try and get a little bit less feedback on this microphone. And then we have a PowerPoint that I'll ask Alex and Paul to do for you all that will review the findings from 2017 and 2018 reports, talk about some intersect between NDS and Public Works, and what we've been doing to address those findings. I believe we should probably be in a position to have the second half of the session for any council questions. So, you all are aware that this is kind of a two-phase process with regard to the efficiency study, and that the second phase was to take a deeper dive, a look just at neighborhood development services. And in fact, really the first study itself was at least in part stimulated by interest of the council and the public in NDS. And when the first study came through, obviously staff prioritized with some council input each of those findings, and council has talked a bit about how to address development process concerns in NDS with new structures and potentially new positions. And the study does have some findings and recommendations in that regard. I think that a high-level overview of where we'll take you tonight is to say, I don't know how much further I should be away from that so that I don't hear that hum, but maybe David will help us. Is to talk a bit about some of the things that are really already completed, and to talk about a strategy that we have that we think will address many of the findings with changes in business practice and tools, technologies that we'll put into place. You know, one of the main questions that council and staff have confronted is where should we be structurally, and where do we want to be process-wise? And I think we're prepared to answer both of those questions this evening and propose some solutions. We do know that the process is complicated, and I'll just throw out a caveat. One thing that we hope we can consider moving forward beyond this point is there is the part that we can change process-wise and structurally and tools with staff, right? There is also a question that no efficiency study has confronted, which is what happens after the staff part, right? And the complexity of our local system when we have engagement and neighborhood associations and BAR, HRC, place, planning commission, council, those interactions also have a big impact on the efficiency and effectiveness of the development process. And we probably need a plan going forward about how to analyze the time that takes and all the groups, how they interact with the process. And if there's any streamlining of the number of groups that can be considered in the future. So that's where we're headed this evening. I asked Michelle if we're ready to come up. You can take the podium if you would, talk with us a little bit about your engagement with the city. And thank you for traveling to be here with us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this evening. I just wanted to take a couple of quick minutes before staff get into their presentation, just to reorient the group a little bit about how we got to where we are today. It's been several years in the making. As Mr. Murphy mentioned, back in January of 2017 now, we presented to the council at that time the results of the citywide efficiency study. And that efficiency study obviously included a number of recommendations related to process improvements, staffing changes, some structural changes, as well as other opportunities for improved effectiveness throughout the organization. As we talked about at that time, we found this organization to be a very high-performing organization, but as such, every organization has room for improvement. And so after the efficiency study was completed, the city had contacted us again several months after that to conduct, as Mr. Murphy mentioned, a more in-depth review of NDS. And so that work began really in earnest in the fall of 2017, so a little over a year ago. We spent time meeting with staff throughout NDS. The efficiency study was a higher level study, and so we didn't have the opportunity to talk with all of the staff members within NDS at the time, or any of the departments for that matter, nor did we have the opportunity in the efficiency study to spend time talking with neighborhood representatives or members of the development community. And so back last fall, we did that. We had a series of meetings with the NDS staff. We also met with staff in other departments, other city departments who interact frequently with NDS. We also had a series of neighborhood and development community meetings. We met with members of the nonprofit community as well to solicit their feedback, to understand their perspective of what their interactions were with the city and particularly with NDS. And we also at that time conducted a stakeholder survey, and so NDS had provided a list of email addresses of people as well as organizations who interact frequently with the department, and that survey was made available to, I think it was well over 150 individuals who interact with NDS to again, provide feedback. So we tried to have a couple of different mechanisms to solicit that input. We provided a draft report to the city back in December of 2017, and then worked with staff in the city manager's office at that time to finalize the report. I'm sure at this point you all have seen a copy. That report is now 8 to 10, 12, almost 12 months old. But included in that report were a series of more specific recommendations about NDS. They really focused on some structural changes to the department, looking at some staffing needs that we saw to really help address some of the issues that we saw in terms of workload, as well as the desire for increased interaction in the development community and in neighborhoods. And so there were some recommendations for some additional staffing. There were also recommendations related specifically to the development review process and trying to develop more channels of communication and engagement with applicants in the development review process earlier in the stage to help clarify and in some cases demystify some of the process. And then there were also some technology related recommendations that were included in that report. So those were just, it's a very high level overview of where we are today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the staff to talk a little bit about what they've done since that time, specifically with those recommendations.
Good evening, councilors.
Good evening.
And good evening, the attendees. Michelle just provided overview of the process that led to the recommendations we're going to discuss this evening. And I'm going to go over the recommendations and also provide an update where we are in terms of implementation, and then also there will be illustration of multi-department approach in terms of solutions to the recommendations. Okay, the initial recommendation includes the original recommendations from the citywide studies. And recommendation number 26 essentially is to engage the development communities in the process to identify development review reforms necessary to improve efficiency. Recommendation 27 calls for designated an assistant city manager as the owner of the city's development review process and the person who will chair the pre-development meetings. Recommendation 28 essentially indicates implementation of a new development services software system. Okay. Regarding the staffing side, recommendation 29 talked about beginning tracking workload data in order to make informed staffing decisions and adjustments. 30 also calls for establishing a practice and process for annually reviewing and adjusting the fee structure for neighborhood development services. '36 calls for creation of an operations division in the Department of Public Works. And recommendation 37 also calls for creation of an asset management division in the Department of Public Works. 38, creation of engineering division in the Public Works Department. And 39, creation of a traffic function within the engineering division of the Department of Public Works. 46, creation of a comprehensive asset management plan for the Public Works Department assets. And 47, implementation of a work order system. In terms of structure management,
So, Alex, we just clarify, we're getting into the second study with
for
this slide.
NDS.
Yeah.
Essentially, before I proceed on this, there were three major, the recommendations are rooted in three major components. One is structural management. And the second recommendation is to develop a development review process to improve operations, and then technology and performance. And those three components were broken down into 8 recommendations, which I'm going to illustrate right now. The first recommendation is to create a support services manager position that will oversee our front desk operation and technology operations, and then the mapping services. That's what this position will be responsible for. The second recommendation is reallocating job duties among internal support staff. And recommendation number 3 is rebalancing neighborhood areas assigned to planning staff, including projects. 4 is to create a new planner position on the planning team and refocusing the role of that senior planner and urban design currently to a much better urban design and then urban design responsibilities. Because right now, our current urban design has several other projects that are not urban design related. Recommendation number 5 is to establish a protocol for responding to City Council inquiries. 6 is to create a comment review meeting between NDS staff and applicants for eligible by right project. And 7 is to provide staff with the appropriate technology to complete their work as needed. And finally, the final recommendation was to develop a specific performance measures and leverage software to track them.
So Alex, if I can interrupt you and just ask Michelle to verify this, these two studies with NDS are meant to be read together, right? The new 8 recommendations are not to the exclusion of the first set of recommendations. They're meant to be read in tandem. Is that correct?
Correct. They'll supplement,
Okay.
intended to supplement the recommendations that were in the efficiency study.
Okay. Okay, here are some of the updates. Since that plan was done or completed, there has been several activities geared towards the implementation of the recommendations. Recommendation 26 from the original citywide study, staff has improved, provided opportunity to the development community in terms of getting involved in the development of the comprehensive plan, standards and design manual. And then we'll be meeting with a representative from CATEC to discuss business process mapping, which is currently underway, and then development review and permit tracking software acquisition process. That meeting is scheduled for this Friday.
Okay.
Recommendation 27, the update on that is.
I'm sorry, Alex, I apologize, Mr. Coon. May I ask who's going to be at that meeting
You mean this?
on Friday?
I'm going to be meeting with Greg Powell.
Okay.
Greg Powell is essentially the lead coordinator for cadre.
Right.
Then during that meeting, what I intend to take away is he goes back and then probably either they send the representatives that will meet with the staff and our consultant that is developing the business process mapping.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Regarding recommendation 27 about assistant city manager owning the development review process, right now the assistant city manager and currently the interim city manager has been helping to mitigate conflicts arising from development review. The status on recommendation 28 is that we've hired a consulting company named Avero, A-V-E-R-O, and we kicked off the asset business process mapping last week. There were 3 meetings scheduled, and he's coming back at the end of October for a few more days. And he's going to be discussing with staff the findings, and then we'll be scheduling meeting, like I said earlier, with the development community, and then maybe representatives from perhaps the Planning Commission and maybe BAR. And at the end of this process, which is expected to be concluded in February of 2019, they will produce a report. And that report will be reviewed by representatives from appropriate city department, essentially the city stakeholders in terms of development review process. They will review it and provide comments. And then the development community, cadre, and their representatives will also review it and provide a comment. And the document will also be provided to the Planning Commission, BAR, and any other approving authority within the city that is responsible for reviewing development applications. Subsequent after that, they will make revisions based on the comments received from staff, the Planning Commission, and maybe City Council and the business community. And then we issue our RFP. And that RFP will probably be issued in March. Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, around March or April. And then the essence of the RFP is to hire the company that will actually help in terms of acquisition of the software and implementation, as well as training. So we'll be doing that following the completion of the business mapping process.
And how comprehensive is that software system? Are there other parts of the organization that are going to be leveraging this software?
It's the whole back half of our presentation, so
Okay.
if we pause for
Sorry.
just 2 or 3 slides, that's what Mr. Oberdorfer will
Okay,
address.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, recommendation number 29, begin tracking workload in order to make informed staffing adjustment. We've initiated data collection. Usually, in terms of tracking workload, you build up the first phase is to build up your data, and subsequent after that, you'll be able to track and then be able to tell the timeline in terms of staging a project. We've started that data collection. Recommendation number 30, establish a practice and process for annually reviewing and adjusting the fee structure for neighborhood development services. Okay. Last year, in 2019, staff sought funding for the CIP process to conduct a full-blown fee schedule study. That wasn't funded. We are resubmitting the same application for 2020. The essence of this is a lot of community does this, and the county, several years ago did a comprehensive, full-blown fee schedule study. And when they completed the study, they created some kind of a foundation upon which to increase their fees on an annual basis. During the budget cycle, when maybe sometime next year around May, when the county is getting ready to approve their budget, you will see an ad in the paper that says that the county is proposing to increase their budget. The county increases their development fee budget fees every year by 3%. So they float that in the newspaper for people to provide comment. Those increases were based on this particular study. It's an expensive study, and we hope the city council will consider funding that particular study. Additionally, the study pays itself. It pays for itself within 3 or 4 years. The city can recover or recoup the amount of money it spends to conduct the study, provided the city council is willing to raise development fees, as recommended by the consultant. Okay. I think recommendation number 1. I think what happened?
It's a 2018 study.
Okay. Okay. 2, reallocate job duties and internal support staff. That is completed. And 3, rebalancing neighborhood areas assigned to planning staff. That is completed. Creating a new planning position. That is pending. We received $100,000 to hire a planning staff. However, staff recommended that funding be used to hire a civil engineer. So that decision is still pending between hopefully council and the city manager. But we would like to have expedited action on that so that we proceed with hiring, whether it's a planner or an engineer. But
So
staff
is
would
that
prefer.
coming before us the next meeting?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
It's
ask.
already funded.
But when
Yeah,
will
but
it come
we-
before us?
But we were told it was a planner position.
Well, I think.
I think the last meeting.
I think in the proposed budget, what was approved is $100,000 for one or the other.
Either.
Right.
And you all asked about it a month or 2 ago, and at the last city council meeting in the responses from the manager, I had let you all know that NDS was planning to recruit an engineer, so.
So that's, okay.
Yeah, that's
But
it.
we never discussed it. I mean, that's why we're doing this.
Right, we could certainly discuss if council wants to share that intent. I would say that in any department, what the roles are of the individual staff members would be in the purview of the department head and the city
Sure.
manager. So would be unfamiliar territory to specify that it's going to be a particular role.
But in light of the efficiency study and the restructuring, I do have questions as to why we have so many engineers and traffic specialists in NDS, which is a planning department, and not in public works. So that's why I have a bigger question.
Great. Well, I think tonight is a good night to
Yeah.
address that.
And back to the first recommendation, what, have there been a request for this? It says pending funding availability for this support services manager position.
What's, you mean creative, yeah, that hasn't been funded. That's part of the question, staff has.
So this, and Michelle can go deeper on this, but this is the observation in the second study, that we're all
Yep.
into the 2018, that the span of control basically under Missy Creasy as the assistant director has too many direct reports. And this study recommends something that was after our approved budget, really, that needs to get broken up. And this support services manager is beneath the assistant director, but taking away some of the direct reports.
And I can tell council right now, that's a problem. It's a very challenging problem, because sometimes I have to assume some kind of, when the plate is full, which gets filled up pretty quick, I have to assume some direct supervision. So this is a problem in terms of the structure right now. And the 5, establishing a protocol for responding to city council inquiries. The draft is done. Creating a comment review meeting between NDS staff and applicants for by right projects. That is done. We've notified appropriate city departments that have a vested responsibility in terms of development review. And we'll be making changes to our application form so that the applicants will know that this opportunity does exist, and they can take advantage of that after the pre-application meeting or after they have submitted the application and staff provided their comments. This is about technology improvement. This past summer, IT upgraded all the computers in the department, and the second aspect of this is we've placed an order for a much bigger capacity for our GIS staff to be able to handle 3D analysis for planning and zoning decision-making process. And the third component aspect of this is the development review software acquisition, which Paul will be discussing with the city council.
I just want to chime in because this is a pretty broad, provide staff with appropriate technology to complete their work. And what you've listed here are definitely very direct ways, but something that's come forward, I know it was even brought up with someone that wrote to us today, and it's something I've considered, is providing more information more readily available to our public, I think would also save staff time, because I think that they're on the receiving end of a lot of questions that if we were just had a more streamlined approach for the data and even just the documentation that we provide for a lot of these projects, and I'll use the county as an example, they have a pretty established file structure system that the public can easily access, and I think it would just save staff a lot of time from having to always handle those things one-on-one. And so as I'm looking at this as pretty broad stroking, I just don't want us to lose track of those less direct things that we can do to leverage technology to free up staff from some of that pretty manual response.
And to follow up on that, this is very, very heavily about development review services, which is the development community's needs. And as we discussed at the very first January 2017 efficiency review, there was a need to have a balance for the residents in the neighborhoods. And that's echoes what Councilor Hill is saying, but I'm not seeing it here, that there's, and I have other questions later on, but that it's really important that we are acknowledging the concerns and questions that come in from the general public and processing and responding to them in an efficient manner as well.
So I think that part of what
sorry,
comes next,
we gotta wait.
one slide from now, I promise, is to say that there are a total of 8 recommendations that we think are are going to be resolved by the process of acquiring technology and the business process mapping. It is exactly for the purpose that's being described, so that it is apparent to not just staff and the developer, but a neighbor, any person from the community at any time to go into the portal and see exactly where every development project is in the process. And so we are attending to that, and I promise it's in the presentation from Paul.
And finally, developing specific performance measures and leveraging software to track them. Like I said earlier, we've initiated the data collection process to inform measures going forward. So the next presentation will be about the solution, which will address the technology, whether it's private, neighborhood associations, public, and what have you.
I do have another higher level question.
Okay.
This is the last chance. We've all been trying to get this meeting, but I can't help but notice that of the 15 to 20 tables that were in the NDS efficiency review, issues relating to traffic engineering, zoning, and regulations, the review process, and engineering, they all received over 50% negative. For areas related to zoning, in particular, was over 65% negative. So what I read in the Novak study was that it said that NDS benefits from a well-defined planning and development review process. I'm hearing a lot about development review, but I'm not hearing about how we're getting the planning process up to speed, so that we can anticipate our growth needs, anticipate, how we inform the public. I don't see how all this is addressing those comments that are located in the tables. If somebody can speak to that, I would like to know.
Well, a lot of the comments related to the zoning, we believe that once we acquire the software for development review process, there will be a substantial improvement in terms of those particular areas. Now, in terms of the planning or resident concern, I think the City Council did pass a regulation, an ordinance, broadening staff requirement in terms of noticing. I think that has addressed some of the issues related to the neighborhood association. But in terms of the zoning aspect and things related to that, I think once we acquire development review software, we think that's going to provide a measure of improvement in terms of those concerns.
Yes, I'm not saying it clearly enough, because why are we expediting the development review process when the zoning we have right now leads to built outcomes that are not appreciated by the public?
Well,
so why are we? Why are we not?
I think we need to have. There has to be some kind of addressing the issue fundamentally. Like the city attorney said, I didn't say that, but for somebody who defends the city's zoning ordinance when there is problem, the city's zoning ordinance, I'm sorry to say that, is a wastebasket of errors. Now, staff has a lot of problem in terms of interpretation, so it makes it extremely difficult for a zoning administrator, to effectively provide either zoning review letters and what have you to the applicant until we change our zoning and make it what it's supposed to be. I think we are going to continue to have a problem. We need to address that, and with the completion of the comprehensive plan, hopefully in December, and the Planning Commission approves that, the City Council votes and ratifies that, and then we find either the city will do it by itself, or we get a consultant, or a combination of staff and steering committee to fix our zoning. We'll continue to have all kinds of problems in terms of zoning review or what have you. It's a big problem, and we need to fix it. We need to fix that first before we can address some other problem. But like I said earlier, I think the development review software we are proposing to get is going to address some of these problems. However, the issue of the current status of the zoning ordinance needs to be addressed. If it's not addressed, we continue to have a problem.
Well, that helps quite a bit, because it without that comment, it did seem like we were just
Even
going to be
the
doing
zoning,
bad stuff faster.
The zoning, let me point this out.
Really?
The zoning administrator, every time he writes a zoning certification letter certifying that a given development is consistent with the zoning ordinance, it has to be reviewed and certified by the city attorney. That's not best practices when the city attorney has to certify the zoning letter that a bank is requesting, or somebody who is looking to get a mortgage and things like that. That's not the best practices. So until we fix that, that is the fundamental problem. Once we fix that, I think we will have a measure of improvement.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Paul Oberdorf, the Public Works Director.
Good evening.
Good evening, Council. And I just wanted to follow up with what Interim City Manager Mr. Murphy was saying about, what we're currently doing as an organization. I think we do a very good job at in terms of our asset management, some of the things that we're doing in the planning department. But we're using disparate systems, things that don't speak to each other. The business processes aren't integrated. And so I think what we're trying to attempt is to create a corporate language that speaks to all of these business practices and aligns what we do so that there's a better crosswalk and understanding amongst departments, and also more transparency with the public about what goes on behind the scenes. So I'm going to speak very briefly about the 8 recommendations that would be handled with a permitting and work order system, one platform that would deal with all 8 of these issues, and that would be recommendation 26. It would assist us with engaging the development community, again, creating transparency, the opportunity for them to get online without a phone call or an email, implement new development services software. That's exactly what we would be doing. Begin tracking workload data. So this would create markers along the way and timestamp things throughout the process. Again, this is a NDS recommendation, but it also is for the rest of the organization. So as we get phone calls, whether they're complaints or concerns, we follow up with it. It's more of a customer interface that will allow us to take advantage of creating efficiencies. Time tracking, this was for Parks and Rec. Again, so the system, the work order system, would allow us to continue to track what we do in our workload and create a comprehensive asset management plan for Public Works Department assets. Well, it's not just Public Works, it's all of the city assets, so it would assist with that. And implement a work order system. Again, across the organization, we would have a unified work order system so that when you get a call down on the mall, we didn't know if it was parks, public works, utilities. There are a lot of crossover in what we do and what our responsibilities are, and having a unified work order system and CRM in place would address that in a much more efficient way and give an outcome to the resident or whoever was posing the concern a lot quicker. Recommendation 7, provide staff
Will
with...
they get a notification?
If it's email, if it's through the email, they would get a notification back. Yeah, if it's a telephone call, whoever was on the system could simply look it up and get back with that person. Providing staff with the appropriate technology to complete their work. This is really big. I mean, we're probably a good decade behind those that have been doing work within a GIS-centric system of this nature. And so we're behind the curve, but yet the bleeding edge has figured out all of the problems for us so that when we implement, we should have less hiccups. Develop specific performance measures and leverage software to track them. Again, creating metrics that speak to efficiencies in time, efficiencies in workload, and for instance, Public Works, how many days does it take us to respond to the different complaints? With a pothole, it should be 24 hours or less, for instance. So we'll be able to track these a lot easier than we are in our current system, which is SAP. So one system to solve 8 Novak recommendations. Again, you have NDS, Public Works, Utilities, and Parks and Rec that have a crosswalk of information that we all share. And having one system that would deal with all of our infrastructure, all of our development, and all the regulatory compliance that we deal with would allow us to be more effective in how we do that. Currently, we're dealing with all of those things. It just takes us a lot of effort to get there. So right now we have ArcGIS. All the departments are using it and leveraging it, but not to its full capability. The ArcGIS server is basically what we use for all of our asset and land management, and it creates maps and visualizations of what we own and where it's at in a spatial environment. What the GIS-centric system would accomplish is taking permitting and planning and the functions like inspections and licensing, code enforcement, and assets and asset management, and fold that over top of the Esri platform so that we have an authoritative data system of record. And that system of record is based on a geospatial environment that everybody can access. It's a visual environment that makes it easy for us to create maps and metrics for the public to understand. We're doing those things right now, but we're hand jamming a lot of this and creating it as we go ad hoc. What the platform would do would consolidate all of these things, including concerns from the outside that maybe one department gets and it doesn't register over in the other department because it's handled by, let's say, somebody in Public Works when it really was a parks issue. So the one enterprise solution would deal with, again, all of these different areas. So you have asset management, which is a Public Works and Utilities area. Environmental health is under Public Works. NDS has land, licensing, right-of-way, which spills over into Public Works in that interface. Utility billing, which is utilities and actually finance. There's some other modules that can fit into it, and then Parks and Recreation. And again, the CRM portal. So the customer relations management is being kind of the umbrella for this so that we can effectively communicate with all of those.
Sorry, how does that portal relate? So we have a relatively new system.
Right.
Is it all part of that?
So it's a standalone system right now, and depending on which vendor we go with, it would either become a module in that system, or if we go with another competitor, it would actually be integrated in that new system. So we'll get the same outcome. It may be a different back end, but the front end will all look the same. So we'll continue to use that MyCville interface, but as a resident, you would never know the difference.
So we're in year 2 of a 5-year contract with Excella. They're one of many vendors who offers the suite of services that Paul is describing, but the background technology is by a company called Public Stuff, and it interfaces with most of the big vendors that we might end up with the whole suite of services.
So again, from a workflow and why this is so important that it's not just a NDS solution. NDS, they deal with a lot of private regulation during the development process. Oops, I'm sorry. Big fingers. But at the end of the day, we accept a lot of assets that are being developed, and those assets are then turned over to Public Works to manage, as well as utilities. And so being integrated in one platform that we all see the information from the time of application through the review process, whether it's a permit, zoning, through construction, and then when it goes into the maintenance cycle, and finally in replacement at the end of the service life, this will all be tracked in one system. And what it'll allow us to do is create metrics and understand what the probable failure rates of our assets are. It'll create an opportunity for more transparency a better understanding of our fiscal accountability and position, and where we are currently with our cash. And I added this slide because asset management is defined by ISO 55000. Asset management capabilities include processes, resources, competencies, and technologies to enable the effective and efficient development and delivery of asset management plans and asset life activities and their continual improvement. So when you look at the built environment outside of the private realm, what we own as a public entity is, in a sense, hundreds of millions of dollars of deferred assets. That's not replacement cost, and I don't have the exact number, but it's in just short of $1 billion. So in tracking that, it starts at the inception of that asset through the NDS process in the new development or redevelopment process. So we want to capture that information and document and put the plans in a e-document system so that they survive the life of that asset. And again, why is this important? Because we're looking at business intelligence from a holistic sense, from people, process, and technology. And so right now we're dealing with the process end, which is creating the business mapping. And eventually we'll get the people integrated to take the business mapping and create the future state. And then finally settle in on a technology that'll solve those things. And why I had those red circles show up right here, for the simple fact that as we invest in these things, as you have more hard costs, we should get better business value and value proposition for the city. And so where are we at today? These are an example. Right now, they're doing current state process business mapping, so it includes frontline folks all the way up to the management team, which is the high performance organization model, the team of teams. And so right now, they're getting the horse blanket out over the next several weeks, and they're going to figure out what's this one process and what are all the different things that you have to do to have an outcome. And then after they get done mapping all 88 different business processes, then they'll talk about how do you get to a future state process. Well, it involves lean, the principles of lean, and how you eliminate waste and transport and things of that nature to reduce all these steps. And quite frankly, a lot of these are outcomes of, basically old culture where you had a hierarchy of, you had a leader and a manager and then a frontline person, and the person up at the top was dictating how the work at the bottom rolled out. And in the talented model network, essentially it's the person that does the work, get them involved in the process so that they have a say in what's the best way to get their job done. So that's really what we're going with now, is essentially a different model, which is the team of teams. And so what you wind up with is then the consultant would take it and put it in IBM BlueWorks, and you wind up with business process model notation, which is basically our corporate language, and it describes how that business process works. And so as they go through each department and do this, they'll all look identical so that the outcomes and the value streams will all align with each other. So then we'll take the BPMN, our corporate language, and when you add that to our software technical specifications and functional requirements, that is, what systems do we have, how do we want it to run, what are the outputs, you'll wind up with a system platform that will figure out what system do we want. Then we have procurement, and procurement can take quite a long time, or we can buy off cooperative contract, and that's one way that we've discussed shortening this time frame is using cooperative contract and agreeing on one platform instead of going out for an RFP and adding time and a lot of work to the process. So implementation can take 8 to 11 months for NDS just alone by itself. As you can see, there are a lot of steps, and the steps basically are linear and logical in the respect that by the time you get down to user acceptance training, all of the bugs should have been worked out for the most part, but we'll spend a good 6 weeks with user acceptance training to finally work the kinks out and run it parallel with our other system. And then eventually when we feel that things are in the proper alignment, then we'll go live. But that process, again, for NDS, we're looking at 8 to 11 months. So what does that schedule look like? We're in October, and right now they're looking at doing business process mapping, 3 months for redesign, and then when you start talking about software technical specifications and procurement, by the time you get down to implementation and tack on that 11-month period, it pushes it out pretty far into 2020. Like we were discussing earlier, we can shorten up our procurement by going to a cooperative contract in lieu of going out for an RFP, and that would shorten up that time period. And then concurrently, we would look at Public Works doing the same thing without some of the steps that we needed in here with NDS. And as we get through Public Works, going to Parks and Rec, and then ultimately to utilities to all be on the same system. So as you can see, there's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of CIP requests that are going to be in for this ask. And again, to maximize the outcome of it, we have to invest resource upfront, both human capital time and CIP resources. So outside of that,
So through the, just for each of these business processes being mapped, I guess, is there a set core team that's going through all of these processes, or you're just kind of pulling in based on people's skills and like where they spend their time? And then secondly, I'm just curious, will this business process mapping also help to determine where some of the movements should go of personnel from one area to another? Because I think that we've heard that in some of these studies that maybe the people aren't even in the right place in the organization to be most effective. And so I want to understand, are we going to get that outcome as well as the technology recommendations?
well, I believe as you look at the business process map, it'll identify the position of the person that should be doing, let's say, just review, if it's a planner or an engineer, and how much time it would take for them to do that. And you can actually build a work plan for the department based on how long it takes them to go through those functions and create an FTE count based on that time allocation. So they have counts as how many permits come in every year and the different variety of permits. And then after you have the business processes mapped out, they would include how much time it takes to get through each of the steps. And so doing an analysis based on, here's the steps we have to take, here's how many permits we get, then you can generate an FTE count. And that would also fall back into, when they do the discovery, they're aligning folks based on their class specification. And I don't know that they're going to go as deep as to say you have an engineer doing planning work or a planner doing engineering work. I think that's something as an organization we would have to figure out.
I have a case study question. Recently, there was a situation where, and I want to know if this system's going to prevent this from happening. So there was a situation recently where a recently developed neighborhood had suddenly been informed that the city could no longer pick up their trash because the street was not built to city specifications, and it was actually never officially accepted. So the community was left without trash pickup. But it's still in negotiation with NDS and the developer to resolve their differences, and we've gotten some sort of a temporary fix, as I understand. So at least we're not having people with their trash piling up on a street. Would this solve that?
I think what you'll find, it's impossible to solve it with a software system because of the human component and people being directed to accept something that otherwise you shouldn't have to accept based on the standard. But what it'll create is transparency along the process. So early on in the process, it'll be easy for folks, instead of a paper-driven system like we have now, to review, mark up, get your comments back. It'll be a lot easier to start from, the initial application and follow it through. And as issues arise, it'll be more transparent for anybody that's involved to understand what those are.
I would go a little deeper on that particular example and say, first, have a meeting with about a dozen people at 11:15 next Monday about that very issue. The issue of unaccepted streets is not a new one. for the city, and that particular example allowed us to explore where all the unaccepted streets are or other pieces of infrastructure in the city. And I think that one of the things we observed is all of that is happening on the NDS Public Works Public Utilities side, but when the treasurer is on a completely different system and somebody comes in and buys a trash sticker, they have no way of knowing which street, because once it goes into the GIS as a street, you're allowed to come buy a trash sticker.
Right.
Now, the other reality that we might confront is, and it'll be part of my discussion with the departments next week, is what really are the city services that you should and should not be able to access, right? It's one thing to say, we're not going to come in and maintain stormwater infrastructure or utility infrastructure that we don't believe is up to spec, or sidewalks or roads, or not plow in the winter. But trash service may be something anybody could access that municipal service without. I'm not going to promise that tonight,
Right.
but that's the kind of question we might
Public
ask
health
ourselves. But there are notably many examples in the city where, in fact, probably the developer may not ever be able to bring it to spec because it's cost prohibitive, or they're not any longer a part of the project. So. Go ahead, sit down, Paul. We'll answer our questions from here, if that's
Right.
okay.
And this has been a question, though, I've had for quite a long time. And, I mean, how typical is it for a planning department to have traffic engineers, engineers in general, in a planning department as opposed to being in the public works? I mean, I haven't seen that very often, and does that contribute to any conflicts? Because the public, a perennial complaint of the public is, why does NDS build sidewalks and why does Public Works repair them? And sometimes they don't seem to be in sync.
I don't think, it depends on the community. I've seen several communities that have building inspections, engineering, planning, housing and community development. Actually, I think NDS probably has the wrong name. It should be called Department of Community Development. But a lot of cities has organized in that way. And some cities, even economic development is part of the planning department. The city I ran when I was in Mobile, Alabama, economic development actually created the department, as part of the CPD. So it depends on how the city sees its function. And secondly, it's more effective and efficient, actually, to have those departments under one roof. Because when there is problem, it's less stressful to get all the representatives from these functions. It's less stressful to get them together to resolve the issue. But when you have them as outlying functions outside planning, you gotta wait. Just like you're waiting for feedback from utility department or fire department and things like that. There is a core function in planning, which includes engineering component, not maintenance, but design, because every subdivision, every project that you do, you gotta deal with engineering aspect of that. Let me give you another example, and this is what is happening right now. I went to a workshop, a First Cities steering committee in Richmond last week or 2 weeks ago. And I met the planning director there, Tiva, I believe was her name. And we are comparing what's going on in their community and what's going on in Charlottesville. And I said, we just completed the efficiency study. And there was a proposal to move engineering department. She said, hey, wait a minute. We just moved our engineering department away from planning, and we got a new city manager, and the city manager, they looked at it, it's not functioning right, and then they are in the process of reconsolidating them back again. So it depends on the jurisdiction. Savannah, Georgia, planning, engineering, building and inspection, housing, and economic development. They are called a bureau. They are together. The traffic engineering is in facility maintenance, which is a public works. So it depends on the community and how they are organized or structured.
I would also say that on the planning and development side, it's critical to have those people together, co-located. And probably, Paul would say, on the asset management side, be critical to have them down in his shop. One of the difficulties we have, and it's something we would have to solve with physical plant allocation, is when we're resolving a citizen dispute or we're dealing with planning issues, it's good that all those people are in the same space. And so with the public works staff, some of them being down at the yard, and then the NDS staff in City Hall, part of that, the geography does play a piece in why it would be less efficient to break those people out to Public Works. If we move Public Works into City Hall, which is where they were when engineering was under Public Works, which is historically something that happened way back, that might help quite a bit. But we're looking at some physical plant changes right now. That is not particularly one of them, I will say.
I just think it's challenging. I think it does create silos the way, I mean, even when it's just a geographical silo. And I've heard it from staff directly that they just feel like there's just such a disconnect across departments. And I just think we owe it to the community to have a more streamlined approach for how we handle these things and to be in good communication. I'm not sure how that happens when we have these physical limitations, but it's something I think, what's been surprising about me is the feedback on some of these topics, ironically, has been pretty consistent from both the neighborhood and the neighborhood leaders' perspective as it has been from the development community. And most people would think that those are pretty competing stakeholder groups, but some of their feedback has come back. And that's where I want to go back to my question around this, the study itself and understanding how this, I mean, we heard a number of times, we've had other public meetings about this study and other occasions when we've just given a chance, and we've certainly gotten many electronically, feeling like they were involved in the process, but they don't see where their feedback was reflected in the output of this. And so I'm just would like to understand how that feedback was filtered and what decision-making there was. And I think some observations I know I had and others had was that, in the executive summary, it said one thing, but when you dig down into the data, it really wasn't reflective of what we were kind of seeing as the highlighted version. And so I know a number of people from both the development community, the neighborhood community, as well as among staff that have shared that concern as trying to be part of the process and really giving that feedback, but not seeing that come back at them in terms of the summary that they see here.
Sure, I'm happy to address. So I would say that, when we engage in a study like this.
Michelle, I'm sorry, could you go up to the mic?
I'm sorry, we're on live stream, so need your sound.
When we engage in a study like this, we are looking at a variety of different perspectives. So it's certainly going to be the perspective of the organization itself, as well as we had conversations in the efficiency study with the elected officials at the time to get their perspective on the work. This is the original study. And then when it came to the NDS study, it was talking with, we had a couple of actually community meetings as part of the efficiency study. I will say they were not very well attended. So we didn't have a lot of community feedback when it came to the original efficiency study. For the NDS study, we had several meetings that I mentioned earlier. Many of those were also not heavily attended. We only had, the cadre meeting, and there were representatives from cadre there. I think there were 10 people who attended that meeting. We had set up 2 additional community meetings for neighborhood representatives, and we only had 2 neighborhood representatives that came. The nonprofit group, we had 2 sessions for nonprofit members of the community. We had 3 individuals that attended those meetings. So in addition to those face-to-face meetings, we also conducted the survey. The survey only had about 52 responses. So in terms of the overall number of people who provided input from outside of staff, it was a relatively small number compared to your overall size of your community. So I want to put that into some perspective and be careful that when we make recommendations then, we want to make sure that they are based on what we see from more empirical data as opposed to anecdotal information, which we try to reflect, and that certainly was reflected in the survey results. You got all of the survey results, so you see what people, those 52, indicated. And then we have to validate that against what we see in the organization and through our review of the data that staff provides, as well as the conversations that we have with individual members of the department and other departments that we talk to as part of this process. So our intent is to be certainly transparent, but also to provide a balanced perspective, understanding that there are a lot of different and sometimes competing perspectives when it comes to what you want the physical environment to look like in this community. We believe that the recommendations that we presented are intended to help balance those different perspectives. We also approach this because it was an efficiency study. We're approaching it from a very structural and staffing perspective, looking at processes that can help bridge some of those gaps and create more transparency for anyone involved in the process. We intentionally talk about the players in this process as stakeholders. We don't necessarily talk about neighborhood representatives or development representatives or applicants. They're all stakeholders of this process that have interests, and again, like I said, potentially different or competing perspectives. And so the recommendations are really intended to look at the department itself and try and build capacity in the department in areas that we believe will help then further the interests of all of the stakeholders in the process.
In terms of the structure of the department, a lot of focus was placed on just the sheer number of people that are reporting to the assistant director. Is this structure at this more senior level of this department pretty consistent with other structures throughout the country that you're aware of?
Well, I would agree with what the NDS director said. I think we have, as a local government consulting firm, we've worked with over 270 local governments across the country, and I could probably give you 270 different structures, literally. Every organization is slightly modified, is different, and it really is reflective of the values of that particular organization, that particular community. I would say from a managerial perspective, having 15 direct reports at an assistant director level is certainly not a best practice and not something that we
Is
would.
it typical for,
why
is it typical for a director just to have one direct report?
Oftentimes, yes. That's not uncommon because while they may have one direct report, they are also responsible for the overall operation of the department. And so it's very typical, and I think you see that in some of your other departments where you may have a director and you may have two assistant directors that have different functional responsibilities underneath them. The director tends to not have as many direct reports in that regard. I don't think that's unique to NDS, certainly nationally, or is it necessarily unique to NDS within Charlottesville's organization too, at least at the time that we did the efficiency study back in 2016, 2017.
I just want to follow up there. I guess I was a little surprised to not see peer comparables. Whenever I've had to look at efficiency studies before, there were comparable communities and how they were structured.
Mm-hmm.
Just taking a look at our neighbor, Alma County, they're structured differently, and they have incredible turnaround times for their development review, but they also do long-range forecasting, planning. They do ongoing updates of the development areas, which are akin to our small area plans, and they do them routinely. I just see that, again, as I said earlier, that there are missing pieces here because this focused so much on improving development review that I don't have any sense whether or not we really are positioned to really do more small area plans so that we can accommodate all the affordable housing we need.
Right.
We need 3,300 units of those. And we've got one done, two underway, but slowly limping along because we kind of outsourced them. And all I've seen is that you've got one repurposed planner who was once an urban designer, now becoming a head of small area planning, and urban design with statements that say that, but we all know that urban design does not have any regulatory review, and so it's not doesn't have authority. So I'm left wondering that there was embedded in this some orientation and bias towards just getting the development review process done, as opposed to looking at all the other issues that the city's facing through its planning department.
I would say there was no bias as part of the work that we did. I will say, in terms of the issues that we heard as part of the process that were the most pressing, these were the ones that were the most pressing. And I think when it related to staff capacity to be able to even engage in some of those more comprehensive long-range planning efforts, frankly, there was no capacity in the organization to do that. We also want to take a measured approach, because we understand that as an organization that your budget has limitations. And so certainly there may be an interest in exploring other models that would require additional staff, to do more long-range planning work. And yet we believe that the recommendations that are in this report are really the most foundational, that need to take place first in order to even begin to engage in those kinds of conversations, to understand what other structures may be out there and what other staffing adjustments this organization would need to make in order to create additional capacity to do that. Again, I think these are, in our mind, at the time that we did this review a year ago, were the most pressing issues that we heard about, and the ones that really were impacting staff's ability to do the existing work that was on their plates. And so living with and living into these recommendations, ideally then create some longer range capacity to do some of those planning efforts, or at least provide you the opportunity to have staff be in a position to catch up and make adjustments, and then you can have that conversation more holistically about other potential models or additional staffing capacity.
Thank you.
I think, particularly since affordable housing is a pressing need in our one of our most important community conversations, right? I think part of that may be about planning and things like small area planning, but part of that is a much broader, much bigger community conversation and some ultimately legislative action and will around the idea of, is there going to be a certain amount of population growth and an acceptance of projects with great density in order to achieve that kind of affordable housing growth? And I know that we've thrown some numbers around in the past, but I really believe that to get to 4,000, we'd have to be roughly double our population.
Yes.
And how that happens in 10 plus square miles, when we know that we are really strictly an infill development community at this point, absent a really difficult discussion about density and growth, I don't know how you get there. And I would say that the recent track record of discussions of density with not just council, but planning commission and community conversations with neighborhood leaders would not favor that that would be embraced.
Yeah, I think there's a great deal of apprehension within different segments of the community in regards to density. So I think we have to take that into account. But I do agree, just based off of where we are as a community in regards to the land space and available, there's lots, just plain out lots that we have to build on. It's very difficult to reach the number of units that a lot of people want us to be able to get to without looking at how we build up. Like, we're gonna have to increase density. So I think Mr. Murphy is correct. It's a conversation that's been absent, but it's one that definitely needs to be added to this conversation.
And that relates, though, to the capacity of staff, too. And so community engagement, as well as looking at where do we put that stuff? And that's usually in the purview of a planning department.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I just think that, even when we I think staff plays a role in this, but we as the electeds also are going to have to make a decision in regards to, are we going to make a commitment, or how much of our political capital or political will we're willing to put forth in regards to building and truly building these units? Because we can't, I mean, we can have community engagement, and if we get 50 people who say, no, I don't want higher, taller buildings, but then we know there's a need for roughly 4,000 units, and one of the plausible solutions is building, going up higher, are we gonna say because we heard from this group that they don't want tall buildings, and we know that's what we need in order to build more units? Like, I don't know. I mean, I know we're gonna have to really make a decision in regards to how serious we are about building these units. And as we're currently constructed, you're gonna have to increase the density. It's like no way around it.
I'm just using the Cherry Avenue small area plan as an example. Just there's been consistent feedback that those surrounding neighborhoods, which you're familiar with,
Yeah, where I live.
right?
Yeah.
Do not want the density that's often being, when they're given those options, there's a lot of resistance when it gets to a certain point.
Yeah,
And that's an area I think, as a corridor, along with the Preston Avenue corridor, that we think we should see some of that density.
However, by getting the three-dimensional mapping is gonna be really important, so people can understand what it looks and feels like, having transition zones.
Right.
Those are the conversations happening in the heart of the SIA, so that there is an understanding, we can get some density here without going to 9-story buildings. We have to get to that level of understanding, and it means having the staff and the tools to do it, and it isn't just development review. That's all I'm saying.
Right. I think that part of that issue, though, is that for some people, when we oftentimes talk about adding density, or when we talk about changing the landscapes of neighborhoods, they're traditionally neighborhoods that are either low income or predominantly African American, and we
Or used
rarely
to
have
be,
these
like
or used to
Cherry
be.
Avenue, and
You're right.
so
Used
the
to be.
people who are saying no to density are people who are usually transplants to the area.
Yeah, who aren't even
So
from it.
that's
Right.
another conversation that
We
we're
rarely,
having.
we rarely have, in my opinion.
That's not what we're hearing.
Well, I rarely hear the conversation around, we need to add density, or we need to put more apartments or increase housing on Park Street. I mean, we don't hear that on Locust Grove. Like, you don't hear about, let's add units in those neighborhoods. You oftentimes hear them in, again, the more low-income neighborhoods, and I think that's what makes a lot of people
I
upset.
think we're saying two different things.
Well, that's how I
Well,
feel.
you get a lot of empty parking lots on the corridor. That's usually a big tip-off that we need to be better purposing that land.
But related to even just the building of affordable housing, though, if we don't get these other processes streamlined, we're going to be really putting up another barrier for those developers who will come into our community to build that affordable housing, from doing it in a way that they can make it work for themselves. And I've heard that from some of our nonprofit developers, just the challenges that they face, because they're obviously working under very different margin assumptions than our for-profit developers. And if we don't improve these processes, we're going to make it all the more difficult for people to come in and actually deliver on the need of affordable housing. So that's just another, kind of thread
I don't
to
think
all
there's
this.
disagreement there. I mean, I think we all would agree that we have to improve the process.
Well, I love Mr. DeCape and his statement that our zoning is a wastebasket of errors. I love it. I'm going to be using that repeatedly from now on.
Uh-oh.
It's the perfect expression.
Well, colleagues,
I might
I'd be
disagree.
interested,
Yeah.
if the public wanted to speak, and then we can ask additional questions.
Yep.
Would
So
anyone-
is there anyone who would like to speak?
Thank you, Michelle.
To the microphone.
Genevieve Keller, city resident. I want you to know I'm fully in recovery. Successfully weaning myself from this, but I felt a little incomplete after our joint session a few weeks ago, and so I wanted to come and hear what you were saying tonight. I wanted to share that I have a concern about the quantitative nature of this report, even if it's about efficiency, especially knowing a little bit more now about the actual numbers. I think it needs to have a qualitative component to it. about what kind of department we want to have and what the outcomes we as a community want to have from that. And as you've been talking about, as well, what kind of development do we as a community want to have? I'm very concerned about the kind of insider developer bias that this report reflects, and that's been talked about a little bit. I think because we do have such a flawed zoning ordinance, we've actually empowered cadre to be able to take a lot of pot shots at the city and at the development process. And that's kind of a problem. And so they become the main stakeholder. And you've talked about a lot of the other stakeholders, people in neighborhoods, people that the new housing is going to serve. And I really hope that this meeting that's going to happen, that Alex alluded to, that you'll have a more complete definition of who those stakeholders are. That's really a concern with me. I think we also need a lot more transparency about when and how developers are interacting with staff. That's something that is still a mystery to me. And I also have some concerns about what kind of new software we're going to have. And is that software going to become a barrier? Is it going to be accessible to the average person with an average computer? Will they be able to find out the information they need to know, or will it just make this a much more complicated process? I hope that that will be something that will help us. And I really have not heard very much about how residents were involved in this. And I'm also very concerned that only one appointed official was part of this study, one member of BAR. No one from Place, not others from BAR, not others from Planning Commission, and not people who had recently served, perhaps sometime in the last decade, but weren't currently in a position. And one other thing. I thought it was interesting about the protocol for how council would deal with staff, and I wonder if you would like to consider the protocol for how appointed officials will deal with staff. Commissioners, BAR members, Place members, do they communicate through a key staff person? That has seemed to be something that's been an issue in my interactions with the city. So thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Mark Cavett. Last night I was at the Planning Commission's workshop meeting, and I said something that actually got a little bit of applause for my comment from some of the Planning Commission members. And basically what I said was, why have a comprehensive plan if we're not going to stick to it? We have a history of deviating from the comprehensive plan and do projects that are not within that plan. And I think we need to be careful about that. Another thing I see as a zoning issue is that, as Councilor Gowan said, it's a wastebasket. We've been talking about changing the zoning, cleaning it up for years now, talking about phone-based code, but we haven't done anything. It just slowly moves on. The developers go in, try to get their projects in before we make changes to the code. And I think a lot of the neighborhoods, what concerns them and gets them upset is these projects that they get put on their doorsteps that probably would not be done in the first place if we had a better plan in place. I know 2 projects right now that are off of the Monticello Highway corridor, and part of that actually, that are coming up where they're asking for a SUP. One is the Hogwaller plan, and another one is a veterinarian who wants to take, a developer that wants to take a building that was supposed to be for apartments and now make some of it commercial so you can put a veterinarian in there and have more profit. Don't we need more apartments, and do we need more commercial? And part of this would be to do the fact that that area is one of the places is actually zoned for highway commercial. The other one, the Hogwaller, he wants to change it to highway commercial so he can get the SUP that he wants. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? No? Okay. We'll close public comment. Any other?
Yeah, so I just go back to my other question. I mean, I just see the timeline for some of this. And I'm getting grayer. It's just going to be worse. I'm just trying to understand, what can we do short term? So back to my question around making like the files more available to our public. I just think it's a pretty simple thing we can do that doesn't take a lot of complicated technology, just so that the public has a better view of like what is coming up. And I know right now we have like our PDFs before they come up before the Planning Commission, but so that by project they can see what actions have been taken, what's been shared. Because right now I just see the planners are constantly like responding to people and attaching them to emails, and it just seems like such a chunky process, and then only a handful of people that are informed, and then it just gets distributed. But if we just could provide just an outlet for people just to go to and you know, procure that information, I think it's going to save staff a tremendous amount of time if it's done in an orderly way. I have obviously a lot of thoughts about our website, way beyond even this department, but while we have this thing that we're dealing with in terms of the website as is, what are some things that we can do to make this information more readily available to our public? Because I just think it's so difficult to find it now. And you have to ask for it, and then you're asking, and you got a planner then having to go through and assemble this information and send it out, versus having it already just available and for the reference of the community. And that's just both the development community. I'm really talking about the residential community.
Are you talking about like applications, development applications?
Applications, like site plans that are being reviewed, like all along the way from, I'm not as fluid in all this, but like
right
from.
now we can see, we check, we can check into that, but the software, you know, we have a system right now, but the system, it's grossly inefficient. It doesn't provide reports. The public can't even access it. Staffs that are connected to it, you know, it can't talk to each other, which was one of the reasons why I initiated this development review process, because we started the process before the consultant was hired, you know, because I requested for some information, and the staff couldn't provide that. So I'm like, we are probably 15 years out of, 15 years backward in terms of the best practices. So that's how this was initiated. But the system we are looking at acquiring is going to be comprehensive in scope. The developer is going to be able to access that and be able to see the progression of the review process. If it's bogged down, the developer will be able to see it from his office. The public, the residents, they'll be able to look it up, you know, and see everything that is going on, what the comments are, and things like that. But in terms of what you're asking, I'm going to go check and see whether there are things we can do. I'm sure in one way or the other, the applications are being posted on the website, at least the things that are going for public review or the Planning Commission or public hearing. And secondly, we have a comprehensive list of projects, you know, all the projects that the city has been working, active project, if you will, that's on the website. Maybe we need to work with the communication director and the IT and figure out how we can make it more.
Yeah, it's not user friendly.
Yeah,
Right.
more-
It's
more
really hard to
It's really
find.
hard.
Yeah.
But this process
so-
is what you're talking about will take 8 to 10 months after you all figure out whether
Right,
you need
2
it or
years
not.
out, yeah.
Yeah, I know, but how much time will this take to come up with something temporary?
I'm just saying, like, we have PDFs of our site plans. Can't we make those available by project description? Like some kind of file structure. Literally, it's all I'm talking about is just like a file structure. And I'll provide someone shared with me the county's example of this, and I just think it's pretty basic.
Right.
But it's helpful because it makes sense, and it's by project, and it shows you all those visuals that, you know, many residents want to see in terms of what is the scope of this? What are they asking for? Is this going to affect my daily life? You know, and I just feel like right now, unless it comes in front of a decision-making body, there's just a black hole.
So we could do something to give you some feedback about what it would look like for us to have an intermediate solution. And we could do that fairly quickly, probably in one of the December meetings, I would guess. But I do want to say, on Alex's behalf and the city's, that, you know, Alex had this approved in the CIP a year ago. We could have already acquired the system and had it implemented for NDS, but there was a decision made, which is a good one in my opinion, that implementing in NDS before we map all our business processes across the city and understand what our needs will be, so that we'll acquire a system that one day we can build out the rest of the business units, is the way to go. And so we could have been there more quickly, but
No,
not
I don't
been
want to
in
be
a
there
better
that way.
place as a city.
Yeah, I don't want to be there that way, because I'll be
Okay.
honest, like, that reason alone was one reason I ran for council, is because I saw we were buying technologies without understanding our business processes, and to me, it's completely backwards. And I just feel like that absolutely is worth the time we put into it. All I'm saying is, in the meantime, I think that there are some things that we could be doing that are pretty straightforward, just to provide more transparency and more availability of some of these key documents to our public, so that they're not caught off guard, and it's not until they see, you know, those reminders that the planning commission is coming up next week, and all of a sudden everyone's scurrying, that we just need to make it more available to the public. And I'm just trying to find ways that are straightforward. I don't want to, like, create this wheel twice. But I would not want to go. I fear that we did that with the MySeaville system. I fear that we implemented a tool without really understanding the processes internally to support that tool. And as a result, I've never even used it, and I don't know how widely it is being used. And that's why I asked the question, how will that be implemented? Because I do think there's probably good things there, but I don't think it was looked at in a comprehensive way when we were procuring it. And I also just am trying to understand how can we divide up these resources in a way that is clean for both how we implement changes both in our street systems, as well as separating that out from the actual private developments taking place. I know there's the right-of-way is kind of a one way of looking at it, and I just think that's something valuable that has just been recently introduced to me. As again, this is not my wheelhouse, but
Right.
I just see that as a cleaner way for us to kind of just delineate where the responsibility lies for one group versus another, and I just encourage us to be open-minded about that as we go through these processes. Sorry.
I've got one. So there hasn't been a lot of discussion of culture in this, and I know that in the private sector and in some government contexts, culture comes up a lot, and there's been a lot of discussion of a couple dozen tactics that are linked to strategy, but I know that one of the things that I've heard has to do with culture and the way that it feels inside NDS, what people get interacting, and culture can be terrific to change because it makes people happier inside, it makes people interacting with the organization happier, and I know that there's a system-wide, like with whatever happens with the new city manager, there will be a lot of things about culture, and it's just hugely important at corporate level decision-making and strategy, how you design your culture, and there's lots of ways to improve a culture, and there's lots of ways that a culture can go downhill, and I know that it's harder sometimes in the kind of formal governmental consulting, because everybody wants checklists of like this computer program or this position we create or this sort of timeline that we establish, but I just am curious about that piece of this. And there's a lot of work out there about organizational theory and different models of how you design an organization and how their culture is set up and how do you create a culture. I mean, like in my day job, culture is like the whole thing. I mean, the culture you create of a successful private sector company is like the beginning and the end of most conversations, and it's where most decision makers, executives, people, how you're setting things up. And I know that when I was in the Warner administration, culture was really important, creating a culture of how that administration worked. And so it's kind of an open-ended question, but I'm curious about, from your perspective, whether that's a separate piece or whether it's something that knits together all these. And I'm curious, Alex and Mike, how you see and I think that in our government, I know that I forget the name of what the thing that we do where we look for innovations among
IT.
Yeah, that it seems great, and it seems I don't have a lot of visibility on it because I think it's that's not, elected officials aren't mucking around in it, I don't think, but I'd be curious about how that is working, and is that a total overlap with NDS, or are there good products from there that could be brought into NDS? Is culture something that we should be thinking about? So it's a big open-ended question, but I'm just, want to ask it.
I would say the innovation team is really across city departments and processes, not really an NDS focus at all. I smile a little bit because I had a long discussion with Mr. Blair today just about this very topic on culture and on process. And so I would say that a good bit of what we can improve in NDS is about process and culture. There have been some suggestions that are about structure. I think that, for me, all departments, including NDS, our focus is public service, right? And so in this context, in NDS, the service, in my estimation, is how do we solve problems, right, for neighborhoods and property owners when they bring plans. That's while there are lots of technical specifications that certainly are important and need to be met, if your lens is more about regulation than it is about solving the problem, right? Then that can maybe inhibit things happening. And so I do think that culture eats what for breakfast every time?
That's right.
There is a saying about this, right?
There is.
And I do think that part of the solution is that, as far as kind of ownership of the process, I think that's something we are talking about, and whether there's a way to pilot that. I'm reluctant to do a lot of structural tinkering around. I'm your interim city manager. So somebody's going to come in, they're going to have some feelings about that. And you're going to talk with them about what your wishes, wants, and desires are, and they're going to have to address that. So are there things we can do in the meantime? Yes. But that really is in great part probably a little bit future-oriented.
But, thank you. So, but from our consultants, and I'd be really curious about this, like there's a book, Galloping Success, Reinventing Organizations by Lalou, which is, but it does apply to the public sector. And have you seen similar cases where the agency has tried to reinvent its culture, starting from the employees up?
In our work, again, we work with cities and counties and towns across the country, and certainly, we believe you cannot provide great service to the community if you don't take care of the people who are providing that service. And so that speaks very directly to culture. It also speaks to processes and resources, leadership, as well as clarity and direction and roles. And I think while we weren't asked specifically to investigate culture, and we certainly do that in many of the engagements that we have, that was not a specific ask here as part of our scope. However, what I will say anecdotally is what we found a year ago, and I know a lot has changed in this community in a year, but certainly what we found in NDS a year ago was a department that was certainly struggling. Because of the workload, because of the competing demands by the development community, by the residential community, by all stakeholders throughout Charlottesville and beyond. And so I think that speaks directly to an organization's ability to be innovative and to be proactive. When you are put on your heels quite a bit, as I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but I think a lot of the staff in NDS probably felt that way, certainly at the time, that they are on the defensive quite a bit because they have a lot coming at them. It is hard to be innovative. It is hard to, I wouldn't say be motivated, because I think the folks that we talked to in NDS are very passionate about providing quality service to this community. They wouldn't be here if they didn't. And so I think that's a tremendous foundation that you have in the department, helping them, resourcing them, and providing them the direction and sometimes the cover can really go a long way to help create a feeling of security and satisfaction so that staff can step outside a little bit, be innovative, be risk-taking, sometimes speak to power in a way that perhaps they may not be otherwise comfortable doing so. And I think, again, not that that was a specific ask of our work, but I think that that is very true in this organization, and frankly, it's what we see in community development and planning and development departments across the country, especially in communities like Charlottesville that have very complex processes and a lot of, it's not easy in this community like it is in many other communities to develop or to manage the growth that you have in a balanced and productive way.
I just quick follow-up. I just think it would be so helpful without expanding the scope or asking for another deliverable with another cost figure attached to it, to basically have what you just said there in I don't know, I mean, this
with
maybe
the new
speaking out of
city
turn,
manager.
but some outtake of what your firm has learned about culture for a city with the different inflection points that we have coming up, without, the anecdotal piece there was just to know what has happened in other cities. If it's like a short memo saying, hey, City of Charlottesville, if you're looking at taking on culture also, here are some insights
as
from
a
other
handoff.
communities. Yeah, I mean, I just think that would be very helpful as opposed to just here,
Part of the
relatively
implementation.
ad hoc. I mean, it could just be very helpful as we go ahead with this, to have more formal insight about this.
But I think we should know, like a lot of the things that we could do better. I mean, Jenny Keller just talked about like this bias, or perceived bias, I'll say it that way, with cadre. I've even talked about it in council chambers about whether staff, you can see them when, you're bringing up a hack member and they are telling, kind of influencing their reporting. Of course, things like that would not, would make people think that the work they're doing is not being valued by council members, and that outside bodies have more influence over these factors than the staff that's been hired. And especially when these outside forces benefit. So those are things that we could just do a better job of, that we know affect the culture. I'm not saying those are the only things, but that's definitely something that we could do a better job at.
Well, I think it puts the city council in a very challenging position when advisory groups that have been assembled by previous administrations of council, and also we have a public that definitely wants to be engaged. It is challenging for our council to then balance those demands with what staff is saying. And yeah, so council winds up being the mediator.
But I think it's also a good conversation for us to have at some point about the roles of advisory boards and how much
Sure.
influence they have. And whether they are able to dictate what comes before us from a staff perspective. And that shouldn't be the case for an advisory board. I mean, they can advise and we should hear it, but we should also always be able to hear staff perspective on that.
But I do think in some cases, these advisory boards are supporting staff because we only have a limited capacity for our staff. And I've seen that in some cases where just staff can only do so much, and so let's bring in some experts or others in the area that can chime in from, a place of understanding to help supplement what staff is doing. And I would also say with the development side, I actually have heard from neighborhoods that they just feel like the developers will just come with everything, and there's this relationship developing pretty early on, and they already feel like they're getting buy-in from staff on projects that maybe we shouldn't even be considering. I know there's been examples of why do we even let this project get this far, considering like what's being asked of it, and there wasn't, you know, a lot of information shared with the public, and then all of a sudden we're already so far down the line, and then I think there's also just this commitment bias because the developer's been along this road for over a year, and now here we are, like, you know, I do have concerns about just what does that look like in the very front end in terms of those relationships, but overall, I agree. I think that right now that what I've seen as a staff is just drowning. Like, they're in a very reactionary mode because there's just so much, and when you're pushing literally physical papers around and you don't have a system that lets you give feedback from several functional groups in simultaneous, and it's all just like linear versus parallel, I just think that it's like 1970s.
Well, 8 to 12, 11 months, right, after, correct?
Yeah.
So we have a plan.
But I think the culture conversation is important. I think a member of the public tonight, Mr. Cabot, said it doesn't come across to the public that the staff is the advocate of the comprehensive plan. That it comes across as the staff is the advocate of the developer. Let's figure that one out. What does that mean? Because the comprehensive plan is the vision of the community. It gets revised every 5 years, but while it's there, it should be something that the public can go to. And so why that perception is there is an important question.
But it's also difficult because our comprehensive plan does not match our zoning.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
it's.
Until we really have those things aligned, it is challenging.
It is,
Something's not gonna be
It is-
met, either
yeah,
your zoning or
yeah,
your
it
comp
is.
plan, something's gonna be missed.
yeah.
So the new position, is that going to be hired soon? Yeah.
We don't have anything posted, and I assume you mean an engineer. That would be Alex's preference. I would say also, you know, based on the multi-levels of feedback now that we have from Novak, it's just as easy for me to advocate it should be the support services manager right now, right? And it's not what you originally appropriated the money for.
Right.
There are a shortage of planning resources. I will be clear, when Alex brought his budget to the budget team last year, he had several positions, right? And we had a lot of choices to make. He wanted a planner and an engineer. And he said, you're gonna have one, and that's why I said planner, engineer, and council approved just the dollar amount rather than the role. All I can tell you is that the department head thinks he needs an engineer the most, and I'm prepared to support that. You know, I understand that there's a lot of other priorities out there. It'd be easy for me to tell you that he needs at least 2 more FTEs. But again, do you want to start throwing more bodies at this when you'll have a transition, you know, in leadership 6 months from now? I don't know.
Right.
That doesn't make a lot of
Right.
sense to me. So,
And the bodies also, if we're gonna have an actual implemented technologies in place that might help us have the true efficiencies that way. So that's
Yeah.
also a question, like what will this look like?
Yeah.
When these things are all humming along like these are supposed to be, what does that mean for our head counts? I don't know.
I think it does. I mean, personally, we're getting conflicting information. Novak said planner, Alex said engineer, we're gonna get a new city manager. We need software. It sounds like to just get to the point where the staff isn't drowning, and better systems. I'm inclined to not invest in staff.
But they also said to listen to the people who are doing the work.
Right. And if he's clearly saying this is
Well,
what he needs,
but
I don't get why
then
don't we?
what is the engineer doing? Because what we got was this planner position. What,
Well, they proposed 3 positions, planner, engineer, and support services manager. I dare say we're not gonna have 3.
there's no budget for 3.
That's what I'm saying.
no, and that's really a big change in the structure, I mean, or the organization, before the new city manager gets on board. But what is the engineer, may I ask, what is that for?
Well, we're getting a lot of, you know, when the department was set up originally, you know, the number of projects were few. But now, the number of projects, for instance, when I first got here, SUPs, site plans, it's like 3. Now, it's doubled. And all these projects have engineering implications, you know, and to compound the issue, if you look around the city right now, the applications we are getting, the projects are much bigger and more complex, requiring enormous engineering attention, you know. So granted that fact, we need the backup we are having right now. We're having a lot of backup in the engineering function, you know. So we need to catch up. And actually, because we are fully staffed, we had some vacancies before the last year, about 12 to 16 months ago, and in the past year, you know, we had fully staffed engineering staff, and our sidewalk projects, even the ones that are being designed in-house and those that are outsourced, you know, started moving on accelerated pace. And but we are just catching up. We are 2 years behind in terms of the sidewalk project, you know. And now we have a couple of vacancies, and that is compounding, you know, the workload issues. Because we are trying to recruit a city engineer and then the assistant traffic engineer, and then in addition to the engineering position we are requesting. And also bear in mind, in the past 3 years, we've sought and received about $100 million through grant applications, and those are for engineering projects. You know, so these are some of the projects we didn't have 3 years ago, and then we now have the funding, and that notwithstanding, we still have our routine responsibility, which is development review and also related functions, aside from those capital projects.
So traffic engineering, for example, like over the last 6 years, has had a lot of turnover.
Yeah.
And I'm
we
trying
have
to.
one now.
No, right, but you have an assistant now opening, so we haven't had a full traffic engineering
Yes.
dual, and like that's something we consistently hear from the community
Yeah.
is an area of
Yes.
opportunity, and it's not because of that, it's not lack of tracking, we just don't have enough resources in there on a consistent
Yeah.
basis, and the cost of turnover is high. So my question is, and I can't remember what any feeling from the compensation study specific to this, because I don't think it went that deep, the one we saw, but are we not competitive enough to retain good talent and recruit good talent?
The city, the HR, Human Resources, is doing a study right now. So hopefully, I submitted an assistant engineering position, you know, as part of that study. And hopefully, the salary and benefit will be adjusted. And secondly, that position is a very stressful position. And to be honest with you, Charlottesville is a very complex community in terms of citizen involvement.
Sure, we see the
And
emails.
that position is going to take probably, I don't know, but it's going to take somebody who has a very, very extended or deep tolerance, you know, to stay in that job over time. It's a very stressful job, and you might be getting another request for construction inspection. Councilor Galvin, you remember the issue we discussed on West Main?
Yes.
You know, and the essence of that is that that particular position.
That's the site inspections.
Yes, it's going to take, because the assistant traffic engineer and traffic engineer, you know, currently are handling that particular issue. But with this person and the issues we have with ADA compliance.
Would this
you
new
know,
traffic
some of those
engineer deal with the
responsibilities
site
we-
inspections?
The engineering inspector we are looking at getting.
So that's
you
in
know, is
addition
gonna-
to this?
Yeah, that's an additional. It may make the position more bearable for whoever decides to accept it.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, so the money has already been budgeted and we support, or
Well, this has been helpful, but again, I mean, what I'm hearing is that it's kind of like the dog chasing its tail, that the reason why there's so much work to do is because we keep granting SUPs that are based on zoning that's not working, and so we need more engineers to process the whole zoning review process, instead of stepping back and what can we be doing to improve the fundamental governing documents that will prevent the need for all this volume. And so that's the disconnect that I have with hiring more people to keep putting out the fire, instead of trying to figure out where did the fire start, how did it start, and how can we prevent it from starting in the first place.
I think, go ahead.
So even with this.
So that's why the planner versus the engineer is what we're
But
talking
we
about.
don't have a new system in place. I mean, our zoning hasn't been changed yet either. So if we're talking about especially staff being able to service the public better, and if we're talking about we have the workload that the current staff has, and if that will help with that, and we've already allocated the money for it, then they are asking us now if they can go ahead with.
I can understand that better. The culture is a big issue, and changing the future is gonna be really important to put forth. So I reluctantly agree to this, not that I have any real choice, but this seems to me perpetuating a system that's not working, period. And we're putting more money into it to do the exact same thing that we've been doing for the last 7 years, that is not getting us to a better understanding of how we should be building this city. And that's
Well-
my frustration.
Sadly, I would offer that, we have such extraordinary turnover with engineers that there's going to be plenty of opportunity to redeploy in the
This
future.
might take care of itself.
So it'll take, and yeah, when we
Okay.
had the conversation about culture moving forward with the new city
So
manager.
Alex, you can go ahead with that. All right, any other comments? All right, meeting adjourned.